Medical workers of Reddit, what were the most haunting last words you've heard from a patient? Student sir, are you in any pain? Patient, the fuck kind of dumbest question is that? I just got fucking stabbed. Fuck yeah, I'm in pain. He died within minutes. A family friend had a very young niece that was dying from cancer. Her parents were there to comfort her in the final hours, and one of the last things she asked was, how do I die? I was about 5 or 6 when my grandfather was on his deathbed. The last thing he did was put his hand on my shoulder and said, "No wonder you never liked my spicy food," and then he passed about 10 seconds later. We were all super confused. About 3 months later I almost died from suffocation after eating some salsa. At the hospital I was diagnosed with a capsaicin allergy. Spicy food. To this day it still creeps me out. No one knew I was allergic before then, and I didn't show any signs either. My pop died of lung cancer. The last lucid thing he did was wake up just long enough to sing "Show Me the Way to Go Home." I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I had a little drink about an hour ago and it went right to my head. It was really pretty amazing and freaky at the same time. Fuck cancer. Edit. Wow, my first gold. Thanks for the glitter and all the kind words. My sincerest condolences to everyone who has lost someone to this horrible disease. Dad was over 80 and had smoked for a lot of his life. I still miss him, but he lived a long life and his time had come. I've lost a couple of friends who are my age to cancer and those deaths are much harder to accept. He was a foot soldier in World War II and he sang that song while marching through Germany, I believe. It wasn't words, but the most haunting death was a patient who was DNR, through her and her family's wishes. She was losing her battle, and her family wasn't there. She was getting frantic and looking around and half sitting up in bed, and a nurse with more experience than me took her hand and calmly said, "It's okay. You're not alone. We're right here with you. It's okay to leave." The patient immediately calmed, put her head back on the pillow and died. I knew I wanted to be that nurse when I grew up. How the hell did she know just what to do and say? I've never forgotten it. I was visiting my grandpa and had to leave town and go back to medical school, and I told him I loved him and would see him later. He told me he loved me too, but no, I won't. He was right. He died a week later of pneumonia. I'm gonna fuck you all up. Old man who never attended his dialysis appointments. A few hours later we had a fire right by his former room, so despite not being all that worrying at the time, he definitely was the only one that followed through on actually haunting us. Nurse. In hospital caring for 40-ish man with brain tumor, coming in and out of consciousness, not to be resuscitated. His 16-year-old daughter was crying non-stop for 12 hours. His wife, who had been given a few months to prepare herself, was calm and focused on her husband. I had to routinely check his level of consciousness, which involved talking to him in a loud voice, respond to auditory stimulation, which I did not like to do. So I asked his wife to do the loud voice part, so the voice he would hear would be hers, not mine, and she did so without hesitation. The only response we observed with her vocalization was that this by now profoundly unconscious patient took her hand to his lips and kissed it. He stopped breathing very soon after that. I am haunted, but not in a bad way. I'm an EMT. Had a patient say I don't feel so good right before they dropped dead of a massive heart attack. It was just the matter of fact way they said it. Not the very last words, but I had a patient in her early 20s who was severely thrombocytopenic and bleeding profusely for days ask me if she was going to make it. I had to look her in the eyes and tell her there is a good chance she wouldn't. I thought she would bust into tears, but no, she just kind of sat back and accepted it. I think she already knew. She died shortly after I got off shift. Wasn't his last words, but last words he said to me, and X200B. I am an EMT, and we had a frequent patient. Almost once a week he was a huge dick, but towards the end he turned into a sweet and appreciative man. We were in his house, which what ended up being our last day there. He knew it. I didn't. He said, "Can I just have a beer before we leave for the hospital?" I didn't let him have it. I should have. When I was training I had a guy go into a massive cardiac arrest. We ended up working on him for over an hour and a half because we kept getting him back then losing him again. He had wet himself during the arrest, which is common. It happens. And he just kept apologizing for making a mess. With wide eyes. Don't listen to my family. They want to keep me around forever, but I just want to die. They won't let me. Edit. She wanted to get off dialysis, which was a death sentence for her. Not a medical worker, but I went with my father to say goodbye to my great uncle, his uncle. He was suffering from dementia and clearly on the way out. He no longer recognized people. My father was an only child, and spent most of his time being raised by his uncles, as his father ran a farm all day. Anyway, we're sitting there, and great uncle is snoozing. He suddenly wakes up and clearly sees my father and starts talking to him about a barn and describing it in great detail. Like, he's talking about where it is, the way the paint was flaking off in one corner, and so on. My father is quieter than normal and just saying yes over and over as he describes the barn. Then, just before great uncle loses consciousness, he describes going into the barn and setting it on fire. Turns out that my grandfather and great uncle were having a haluva dispute at one time and burned down the barn to get back at him. Everyone suspected, but never knew for sure. Edit. Looks like I forgot the last words. Most of them were mumbles, but he spoke about how the fire lit up the night and how it took a while to catch. Having surgery tomorrow. What the fuck am I doing here? Edit. You are all super kind, wonderful people, and I will almost certainly not haunt any of you if I kick the bucket tomorrow. Edit 2. Surgery went well. I am home and resting. For the record, my not final words were as follows. Anesthesiologist, we're giving you the anesthesia now. You'll be asleep in just a few seconds. Me. Stoned on the don't panic drug cocktail. Okay. Sweet dreams, honey. Everyone else in operating room. Ha 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 ha. So I went under to the sound of laughter. Not a bad deal at all. Again, thank you all for your kind words and encouragement. Kid crying for his mommy, but mommy was in police custody for beating the kid into a brain hemorrhage. Hospice nurse here had a patient who was experiencing terminal agitation. With an expression of complete terror on his face, he said, "Help me. They are coming to get me." I see the man in the corner again. And X200B. There was no one, but she'd been seeing a dark man in the corner for days and asking about him. Toward the end, this was all she talked about beside crying for her mother. Cancer. I work as a PA for a clinic, so I'll never be involved in that situation, but I know a friend who has been. She is also a PA and was helping a guy who was terminally ill. Before he passed, he asked her to not let his wife have his shit. Of course she listens and is sympathetic. A day or so after he passed, his ex-wife apparently shows up to the hospital with several kids saying she is in this guy's will. Long story short, she was trying to take his shit. "You tell that man to get out of here right now," she screamed while staring behind me, eyes sharp and focused on something. Me. In the middle of the night, while I was working the haunted hall, by myself. All of the heebies, and most of the jeebies. Paramedic here. I was transporting a cardiac patient, and while we were both watching my EKG monitor, he went into VFib, a lethal heart rhythm. His heart stopped pumping blood effectively at that point, but there was enough blood pressure for a few seconds of consciousness. He looked at me and said, "But I don't see the light," and went unconscious. Coded him, shocked him a few times, meds by the handful, but he died. Not a medical worker, but my friend's husband was dying from cancer. He'd done lots of chemo and one surgery, and overall his prognoses looked really good. He'd gone through another surgery, and he was due to be released from the hospital a couple days after this story takes place. My friend had been with him and was going back home to sleep for the night. Just before she left his room, he said, "I'm going to miss you, my love," and obviously she thinks nothing of it, saying, "I'll miss you too. I'll be back in the morning." Couple hours later he was gone. Thank you from a little old man with stage 4 lung cancer. He had no family, so I stayed after my shift ended. He just didn't want to die alone and I refused to let it happen. Dunno why, but it still makes me cry when I think of it. It's not words that haunt me. It's the last few agonal breaths, gasping and gurgling, before they are gone. I still remember the first patient I lost as we stood by as per patient family request. Haunting. As a pediatrician, I don't hear a lot of last words. What I can never forget is the inconsolable, grief-stricken cries of the parents when I tell them their child has passed away. It's the hardest part of my job. Nursing home. Most elderly people are at ease as they get nearer and nearer to death. But this old lady, as she deteriorated over her last week or so, would scream, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I don't want to die." Really heartbreaking to see. My uncle was born with Down syndrome. He was 42 when he died but had the mind of a 3-ish-year-old. He could do things like brush his teeth, dress himself, etc. but needed prompting and supervision. My GMA, his mother, died in 1974. My uncle died in 1984. The night before he died he told all of us that Mama came to see me last night. My dad asked him if he had a dream about Mama. He said no. She sat on my bed with me and told me she was coming to get me soon and take me home with her and not to be scared because it was all okay. We dismissed it. 24 hours later he was dead. He died peacefully in his sleep.